Good evening and welcome to the 25th anniversary of the history of the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race. It is a rich history filled with challenges, frustrations, and accomplishments. My name is Carol Barry Austin and I am a founding member of the organization. This evening is a snapshot of the origins of the coalition, an organization that was birthed by a group of community residents and town leaders who care deeply about the future of our two towns. There was no blueprint to follow, as some of you, especially former trustees and volunteers, can attest. Much discussion, often painful, about where to focus our energies and who benefited from our initiative. You will hear our story, but not fully appreciate the complexities of a group of individuals thrown together with a common goal to create a stably integrated, inclusive community where all residents are valued in all aspects of community living. As a young board, we did not always agree in terms of strategies. We struggled robustly and sometimes angrily with objectives and often how to meet those objectives. In trying to represent the entire community, we sometimes struggled with messaging. Through perseverance and intentionality, I believe that we have journeyed through many of those struggles, learned from each other as trustees, and along with other organizations, built a community that is more welcoming and inclusive. The journey isn't over. We continue to strive to be a model community where there is representation in all aspects of leadership and civic engagement, and for me personally, true integration and equity in our schools. We did not travel this journey alone, but also with hundreds of former trustees and volunteers who have walked the walk alongside us, many of who are here with us this evening. We also have had the benefit of dedicated executive directors and program directors. We acknowledge all of you this evening. But our work is not done. We hope this evening will inspire each of you to continue the journey with us. Your contributions of time, money, resources, and most importantly, feedback, and yes, sometimes criticisms, inform the work that we do. Communities evolve, and so must we. Tonight is mainly about the beginning of our journey, 25 years to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly. Please look out for our future podcasts and ultimately a book that we hope will explore in more detail the work of the coalition and provide a blueprint for other communities to follow. Again, thank you for your attendance this evening. I would now like to introduce another founding member and our first Board of Trustees chair, Fred Perfetta, who is also a former mayor of Maplewood. Fred.
Thank you, Carol. I second everything that Carol said. Yes, I was the first chair from 1997 to the year 2000, through the year 2000. And by 1997, this community was facing a real crisis. We were the victims of steering, blockbusting by realtors, white flight, stagnant market values, and we really had to do something about this. This was a crisis. We also were experiencing discrimination against the black population that had moved into our towns. But a group of citizens decided that they were determined that they were going to fight this. And this group became the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race. This is not a governmental organization. The coalition is a private corporation, a New Jersey nonprofit. It's a 501c3 under federal law. And we're governed by a group of trustees from Maplewood and South Orange, all diverse. And this is our governing body. It was in 1997, and it still is today. Tonight, you're going to learn a lot of things about the coalition. You're going to learn about our accomplishments and some of our non-accomplishments. But you will learn, for example, that we did achieve a degree of stable racial integration really much greater than, quite frankly, I imagined back in 1997. We have pursued equity vigorously and relentlessly every day, and we have achieved racial inclusion in our civil life that's quite remarkable. We have achieved it in our governing bodies, in our Board of Education, in our police forces to a remarkable degree, and in every civic body in these two towns that really matter in terms of power. And we have a great program for you tonight. I think you're going to really enjoy it. We're going to start with a video that's going to take you back to the 1940s when I came to Maplewood. And when I came to Maplewood in the 1940s, I did not find any black people here. Not that I was really looking, because I hadn't seen any, I think, by that time. I was 2. But from the 1940s and then the 50s and the 60s is when integration really began in Maplewood and South Orange. But in the 80s, it started to get ugly. There was racist reaction to the increasing integration. There was graffiti. There was tire slashing. There were broken windows. It was nasty. And that sort of activity started to engender community groups to take this on. But then the realtors got involved, and they saw that money could be made flipping the town. So that's when we decided we had to do something about it. And we did. Now, after the video, we're going to have remarks by Solana Rowe, whom many of you know as Ziza, the singer. Yes, Ziza grew up right here in Maplewood and South Orange, and her lifespan just about equals the same as the coalition. And she growing up here, she internalized many of the values, many of the teachings of the coalition and of the community, many of the feelings about diversity, and those have informed her life and her music, and she's going to talk about that tonight. I think you'll be interested in what she has to say. Then, I think the main course of this program is next. The main course is a panel discussion with members of the coalition, and this will be moderated by Nancy Solomon, who's the New Jersey editor of WNYC in New York. Following the panel discussion, there's going to be questions from you, the audience. You'll be instructed how to send your questions in by email, and we'll do our best to answer them. We'll end up then with a musical number from Ziza, and that will be the evening. But first, I want to say we are very grateful tonight that we will be opening up this program with remarks by the Honorable Tahisha Way, who has been Secretary of State of New Jersey since 2018. Her resume is quite spectacular. I'll only give you the highlights. She's a Brown graduate, University of Virginia Law School. She was an administrative law judge in New Jersey. She was then elected to the Passaic County Board of Freeholders. She became director of the board in 2009. And then she became Secretary of State in 2018. So let's hear from Secretary Way.
Good evening. I'm Tahisha Way, and I have served as New Jersey Secretary of State since 2018. While I am disappointed that I'm unable to join you live tonight, I'm grateful to say a few words for this momentous occasion. New Jersey is among the most diverse states in our nation. We are richer economically and socially because of all of the different people who call the Garden State home. But even with this diversity, there is work to be done to ensure our communities and the people who lead us reflect all of us. And while diversity and inclusion have become popular buzzwords in recent years, this work is not new to the great people of South Orange and Maplewood. For 25 years, the Community Coalition on Race has worked to make these communities a place for everyone. Whether it is housing, education, culture, or recreation, this organization and your two towns have stepped up in the name of inclusion. It is incredible, inspiring work. As secretary, I share your commitment. In 2020, I was proud to have worked alongside many of you to ensure that South Orange, Maplewood, and all of New Jersey's communities achieved a complete count in the US Census, which included our hard to count communities. The result, we saw the highest response rate our state has had in 30 years. Making sure these populations were included in the census ensures that they are fairly represented in our legislature and Congress, and that federal funding will support programs for all families in need. Now, as our state's chief elections officer, I am committed to expanding our electorate so that every eligible voter can cast their vote in every election without undue burdens or barriers. My department also includes cultural agencies like the State Council on the Arts, which hosts the Diversity in Arts Leadership Program to level the playing field in the arts industry, placing minority and underserved students in the arts career pipeline. And my division of travel and tourism has announced a series of Black Heritage Trails for residents and visitors alike to tour the places where Black New Jerseyans have had an impact on our state and her history. In the next few months, you'll hear more about Jersey Civic Engage, our new effort to empower folk with the tools they need to build greater civic involvement where they live. It is exactly this type of organizing and community building that this coalition has exemplified over these many years. And so I hope that I can count on all of you to be our partners in this work so that we can bring some of your successes into towns across the Garden State. To conclude, thank you, Assemblywoman JC and her Chief of Staff, Mary, for the kind invitation to speak. Kudos to the Coalition on Race for understanding the power of equity and inclusion and doing the work to make it a reality here for a quarter of a century. I look forward to watching your work for the next 25 years. Congratulations again on this impressive milestone. Enjoy the program and onward.
Thank you, Secretary Way. Those were truly gracious remarks. We really appreciate them. So now's the time for the video that I was talking about. This video is going to set the stage for the rest of the program. It really tells the backstory of the coalition. Those of you who came to this community after 1997 or learned of the community after 1997 probably don't know the details of this backstory. But forming this coalition was really hard, and it took real intention, and that's what we gave it. So now let's go to the videotape. Well, it was great for me as a kid, but this is the only place I knew. And it was, I moved here with my parents, and World War II was going on. And after that, I went to Jefferson School over here, and we were great.
Born in Germany. My mother was white, German. My father was black from Shreveport, Louisiana. I came to this country when I was maybe perhaps 5 years old, and we moved to the South Bronx.
But what we didn't notice was, as kids, that there were no people in here that didn't look like us.
We as a family experienced racism early on from both communities, the white community and the black community. And it was always a challenge in terms of As a young person, where did I fit in?
And we were great. We were the United States of America. We had won World War II. So we were full of ourselves.
Well, that's the history of this country. That's our original sin, is that, you know, we were born as a country, as a segregative country. We've never stopped to say, why do we do this? Or perhaps we did, and people knew that there were economic benefits to prolonging segregation.
In fact, when I graduated from high school, here, Columbia High School, there were 423 people in my graduating class. 5 were black, and none of them were from Maplewood. They were all from South Orange. But we began to realize that this was, there were things about the town that weren't that great relating to race.
My mother was getting concerned about the surrounding community and wanted to get another apartment someplace else. And when she went to get the apartment, she said, you know, that we weren't coming, and that my father wasn't coming. She was going to get the apartment. They said there are no Negroes in the building, and they told her that. And it was always an interesting experience because we knew that we were not welcome, and we knew that to a certain extent, people were afraid of us.
In high school, a black family went to contract on a house up on Sagamore Road, which is an affluent part of town. And the residents of Sagamore Road all got together, or a substantial number of them signed a petition saying, don't come here, don't move in. You will not be happy here. I think in the 80s, 1980s, when there was graffiti on African-American homes and various other kinds of defacing of property.
People weren't given opportunities to be leaders in civic organizations. There was a lot of backlash from some community members who were writing nasty graffiti, breaking windows, of slashing tires, not just of Jews and blacks, but also new immigrants.
We were fairly recently married. My wife was pregnant at the time, and we knew that we just wanted to find a place to live.
I want a quiet neighborhood. I want a detached house that's on a quiet street, and I want a fireplace.
We showed up. We were taken around once we got to Maplewood, and I didn't figure this out until after the fact, but we were only shown houses on the east side of town.
And what I noticed early on is that the realtors kept bringing us to Irvington.
1988, we moved in, loved the house that we did end up with. And the neighborhood at the time that we moved in there, I would say was probably about 50-50, black to white, which we actually found very attractive.
The house that she showed us next was in South Orange in Tuxedo Park, where I am now. And it was a beautiful block. Loved my home as soon as I saw it, liked the inside of it when we went inside.
Over the next few years, however, we noticed that all of the neighbors who were moving in were all people of color.
You know, when we moved in, I recognized at that point that there were not that many black families there. But my neighbors on both sides were black.
A group of residents started to see pretty swift racial change happening in Maplewood, South Orange.
We didn't recognize it at first, but what was going on was very vigorous steering and blackbusting.
There were things happening in communities on the border of Maplewood. Irvington had resegregated in a very short amount of time.
So what was happening was there truly was some white flight going on. It was primarily people from smaller houses, many working class, certainly not entirely, but people whose whole savings were tied up in their house, and they wanted to make sure they got something out of it.
They were pushing that scare tactic, which then increased the number of whites who were the current residents, who put their houses on the market. The current in-movers were people of color, And so the actions started to make the realtors' words true rather than them being true.
If you keep track of real estate values, you begin to say, hey, my house is not going up in value. Why is that? And they were in the towns around us, to the west of us, which were essentially all white. So that's what sparked the interest of the governing body.
And my lawyer said to me, you know, there's a whole movement going on in Maplewood. It's all racial motivated, and to stay away from it, Bill. It's going to stop you from what you want to do.
What I'm really worried about is white flight. I'm kind of afraid that people will develop such antipathy that they will feel they don't want to be here anymore.
We were just a bunch of people who cared about the neighborhood, about the town, were concerned about the direction which the town as a whole seemed to be going, and we wanted to see what we could do to affect change to that.
There are areas where one side of an issue or a phenomena is so overbalanced by the other that you need to intentionally intervene to at least set things in the right direction. I was sitting in my New York office one day when I read an article, and it was all about the same sort of thing that I thought we were probably dealing with. And what got my interest particularly was that they had consulted an expert by the name of Don DeMarco.
There was concern about property values, concern about houses on the market in excess of the number that they're used to, and for sale signs proliferating. People were feeling that something was being done unto them, and it had a lot to do with race.
Our first meeting was on October 30, 1996. These are the minutes of the meeting. I remember this meeting so well because it was at the school district building. There were different points of view, certainly, depending on whether you were white or black, as to how this should proceed. But that we then were meeting at least twice a month from then on for a long time.
We adopted a common language. We adopted precepts and principles, and we hammered out words. We could spend an entire board meeting talking about what certain words meant. Coming to agreement was not a matter of a simple vote up or down. It was a process of compromise.
I'm willing to say that our focus is encouraging whites to this community, but you need to understand that what I need in return is to focus on equity issues in the schools.
So we pointed out that we all had one common interest, and that was to maintain the values in this town. And that, at least as a temporary measure, allowed us to move forward and attack the resegregation first, but always with the promise that we would at the same time, and later with even greater intensity, deal with the question of equity.
So I think that communication with the community started prematurely in some cases.
The Community Coalition was not the first community group to address fair housing, education, equity. So the coalition comes, and so now it seems like it's new that the community is now addressing housing and education in the high schools and leveling. So the community was a bit curious. I was curious myself, to be totally honest with you. Again, I just thought it was just some kind of feel-good approach, but it was, it feels good, but it's not going to pick up much traction, and before you know it, it's going to die out.
So the coalition realized that there had to be other mechanisms put in place that were very visible in order to demonstrate the commitment to having a community of color find safety and value in living in Maplewood, South Orange. So the focus on schools, leadership programs to really encourage people of color to work in leadership in their neighborhoods and begin to work up the ladder. We started looking at the makeup of the police department, of the fire department. We started looking at the makeup of teachers that were being recruited to the schools, reporting to the community that makeup and putting pressure to ensure that we weren't the only ones aware of that the community was aware and the people that made the decisions were aware. That equity piece really started to be pervasive throughout the organization, visibly.
So what Don did that I don't think, we certainly didn't have the resources to do. He told us how to deal with these fellas.
There were testers out in the market. Real estate companies were confronted. I believe that we got some of them to change their practices, which certainly helped to address the problems that we were having.
So we accumulated a lot of evidence, legally admissible evidence. But we never had to go to court with these realtors because we confronted them with it.
But I was at a meeting once where the realtors just screamed at us and said, we're not allowed to even think about race, you know.
And there was a lot of distrust among the realtors because they felt like we were pointing at fingers at them saying, look at what you're doing wrong here. And it took a lot of years to build, again, relationships with the realtors, with the different agencies, and actually setting up consistent meetings with them.
Intentionally marketing the two towns.
Creating brochures that were selling the two towns and what was beautiful about the two towns, and sharing that with the realtors and saying, you can use this to sell our communities.
So marketing like that is an intentional intervention.
Against the predictions that a community that experienced swift demographic change like these two towns did, we stabilized, meaning less white flight, more introduction of other groups moving to the community, and we could see some increased, not just diversity, but integration neighborhood by neighborhood. We still see some neighborhoods that are resistant to increases, and we've seen some neighborhoods destabilize slightly, but the changes are modest. To us, this is a good sign that we're on an ongoing right path.
Every town needs a community coalition on race. It really isn't black and white, as much as we want it to be. The reality is that it's not. And I've got to believe that with examples like the Community Coalition on Race and what they've been able to achieve through all the ups and downs and the nonsense, that there are other communities out there. And hopefully one day the United States of America, but there are communities out there that says, okay, it's going to take work, it's going to take a change in thinking, and it's going to take not being so suspect of change, that change is bad.
We are a community, a very contentious community. We put it all out there, but we are a community that works very, very hard at trying to be fair, trying to be equitable, and trying to listen to and represent the different voices that are there within the community.
One of the first initiatives that we had as soon as we joined on was having a heart-to-heart with all the realtors. We did an education about inclusion, about affordability, about loan products,
right,
and stopping the discrimination.
CCR gives us that opportunity to sit and collaborate and understand how do we make this industry better day after day.
Most parents would want their kids to go to an integrated environment. They want their kids to go to school with kids who are different from them. We're building systems where by the time students are adolescents or early teenagers, we have constructed a world for them that reflects the real world of their community.
Institutions in the communities now use the word integration regularly. They use it as a way to assess what they're doing. They use the language of racial equity to assess their success.
We can never get comfortable, right? When you gain in integration, you gain in civil rights, equality, we can never get comfortable because things tend to be taken away.
We need them. We know their value. We see it day in and day out. And so for us, this is a matter of encouraging volunteerism, getting some more money into that budget, people taking an active role in maintaining what we have that's so special.
The objective is to start the conversation in your own community.
Playing a role in keeping this community the way it is and moving it in the right direction as it has been going is, I think, the most important thing I've done in my life.
So the coalition has put together a model. And yes, it's within the context of SOMA, South Orange and Maplewood, but South Orange and Maplewood look just like the rest of upper middle class communities around the country with some diversity. They prove that it can be done, and it's not just a dream.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Gagne. I'm the Executive Director of the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race. And you've just heard from a few of the founding members, community members, volunteers for over the years serving the Community Coalition on Race. And now we turn to the voices of two special individuals, Audrey Rowe, Program Director of the Community Coalition for over 20 years, and her daughter Solana, known to many as the music artist SZA, who was raised in our community.
Hi, I'm Audrey Rowe, Program Director for the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, and this is my daughter, Solana. Many of you probably know her as SZA. We're here today to share in the celebration for the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race. 25 years, it's a long time for anything, but particularly a long time to be working as we have so diligently done against the impacts of inequity and racism. It's hard work. And we hope that in this 25th anniversary, those of you who are in the community and others who may be beyond our boundaries who are viewing this will be willing to join in to make a difference. Making a difference doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be everything from working on a particular project. It can be working on a committee. It can be supporting some of the work of the coalition, both, what should I say, in spirit and financially. I'm going to stop talking now, though, for a minute and just let Solana say a little bit about what it's been like being here beside me for most of this time.
Hi, Solana Bell, also known as SZA. My mom has been working on this basically my whole life, and I've seen her just pour so much energy into it, from being myself impacted by the leveling system to just engaging in discourse with police officers, teachers, other students, their parents, and having like a real-time, real-life connection to this work, or watching the change, the shift in the community, going to town meetings with my mom when we're discussing who's moving in, what kind of response do we need to give those people, making sure everyone feels welcome and that they have a voice in this community is really important. And I've watched my mom pour all of her energy and all of her time just really into this initiative. And the fact that she is still so passionate about it lets me know that I should be passionate about it. It lets me know that now she has thankfully so much more backup with some of the youth at the high school and all these amplified voices that are so diverse. And I'm just really honored to get to witness that firsthand and to be a part of that diversity and be a part of that constant conversation of accountability and opportunity for growth. And it's just a beautiful thing.
So thank you so much for taking the time to join us on our 25th anniversary. And we hope that you will not only listen and enjoy this program, but you will personally consider what you can do to make a difference in the mission toward integration and equity and true inclusion. Thank you very much.
I just want to say to add, Maplewood is beautiful on paper. It is a very diverse and inclusive and a rainbow town and all these things. But to make it an actual reality, we have to all participate. We have to believe that every issue is our personal issue, because that's what a true community is about. So thank you for committing to make Maplewood and South Orange that actual utopian place, that beautiful, inclusive, and tolerant place.
That's our vision. And we hope that we will get to a place where we can all have good days. And baby, you want to say a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. So if you stay tuned at the end of this broadcast, there will be a video of Good Days Acoustic, which is my personal favorite rendition. But because Good Days is something that you can aspire to and something that you can appreciate by moment. Every moment may not feel awesome and like a good day, but you can always aspire to that next moment and keep it as a mantra to call in the good vibes and call in the good energy, because that's all we can do in life. Is the law of attraction is attract what we want, and we want some good days.
Beautiful. Nothing to say after that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Solana and Audrey. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening. Nancy Solomon is a senior reporter at and the founding managing editor of New Jersey Public Radio, which won a 2014 Peabody Award for Chris Christie, White House Ambitions, and the Abuse of Power. She moved to New Jersey in 2001 and has been covering the state ever since. She has produced more than 100 stories for NPR and was a 2008-2009 Spencer Fellow in Education Reporting at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. During that year, Solomon produced Mind the Gap, Why Good Schools Are Failing Black Students, for which she won a Peabody Award. She was a member of the Coalition Schools Committee in the early 2000s, when our main focus was on the minority achievement gap, where her participation and research certainly informed many of our discussions. In 2009, Nancy became a trustee of the coalition and served with distinction. She continues to be a wonderful friend of the coalition and valued community member who gives freely of her time whenever asked, as evidenced by tonight. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our moderator for the evening, Nancy Solomon. Nancy? You're welcome.
Hello, everybody. So we have a panel now, and I'm gonna ask questions, and then we're gonna take your questions. You can email them to us at communitycoalitiononrace@gmail.com. And I think at some point we're going to put that up on the screen too. So I think everyone is familiar with Fred Profeta, who's already been introduced, so you don't need to reintroduce yourself, right? Or Carol Berry Austin. Nancy Gagne, I think you've already been introduced. Kelly, let's start with you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kelly Quirk. I am a Maplewood resident, and I am the current chair of the board of the Community Coalition on Race, and I have been a trustee for about 5 years now.
And my name is Erin Scherzer. I've been a Maplewood resident for 9 years, and I've been involved with the coalition for a long time, at least since 2017.
Hi, I'm Patricia Canning. I am a resident of South Orange for almost 15 years, and I think most of that time I've been involved with the Coalition on Race, and I have to say, what an honor to be up here with these coalition dignitaries. I'm so pleased to be asked to participate in this panel, and share just how I, thoughts about the coalition throughout the years for the last 15 years.
Okay, so I'm going to break the first rule of all journalists, which is to save your toughest question for last, so your interview subject doesn't walk out on you. Now, so I sort of want to go to sort of one of the toughest issues that has faced the coalition. And Fred, I mean, is it fair to say that at the beginning there was a split, and that white members of the coalition that were that were founders were really concerned about property values going down, whereas black members of the coalition were more interested in equity and fighting for equity in the towns? And it seems that that's sort of if it's not true, it's certainly a perception about the coalition that has hung over it, during its 25 years. So you want to take a crack at addressing that?
Sure. I think more than that actually being the opinion of white and black members, it's what each group suspected of the other. The fact of the matter is, we all had a stake in market values of our homes. And indeed, often it's the persons of color who have even greater stake in market values, because so much of their wealth is tied up in a house. For most people, white or black, the greatest investment is your home. So there really wasn't a disparity in reality. But we were new. We were bringing together disparate groups, and there was this suspicion that you have your agenda and you have your agenda. But as we talked it through more and more, we realized there was a commonality of purpose which transcended that. Which is not to say that the suspicions have gone away. It's just that that's receded.
Right. And Carol, as another founding member of the organization, do you agree or disagree?
I will first speak for myself as a person of color, that I came to the coalition concerned about racial steering and equity in the schools. I was very aware of white flight and some of the issues that have already been discussed. I do believe, and I am a little uncomfortable speaking on behalf of fellow black trustees, but I would say that the major concern was equity, whether it was around housing or whether it was around schools. I believe it was equity.
And do you think is it true that has the perception, even if it was not entirely true, that the perception of the coalition, that's sort of something that has, been a constraint in terms of building grassroots support in the two towns? The perception that the coalition was really more concerned with property values than with equity.
For me?
Yeah.
I think that was the perception, and that was certainly the focus in terms of marketing. But I also believe that the schools committee tried very hard to balance the messaging in terms of equity, and very early on in 2002, we were already starting to focus on the minority achievement gap, because we believed that in addressing that all students would benefit from that, not just black students, that overall it would make the school system stronger and better for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in the video, there was a little bit of discussion about how marketing the two towns became a sort of fundamental part of the mission of the organization or activity. Patricia Canning, tell us your story, because of moving to South Orange, I think, not Maplewood,
yes,
right?
South Orange.
Because you actually were, I shouldn't say victim of the marketing, successful participant in the marketing system.
Marketing process, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lived in Park Slope like so many South Orange and Maplewood residents, right? And we saw the paper and we saw the article about South Orange and Maplewood and how diverse it was. And we are a interracial family raising biracial children, and so it was important for us to be in a environment, in a community that openly accepted them, and we didn't have to work for acceptance. And so it just made sense for us to be here. My husband found it, and we haven't looked back since. We connected with the Community Coalition on Race to do the tour and to really get to see and understand the neighborhoods, and that was really helpful. And then when we finally decided to move in, I remember we came, and I was talking to one of my members from our congregation, Dorothea Hoffner, and she's no longer with us, but she at 86 was still a pretty present member on the schools committee and in the CCR. And I remember saying, you know, I don't know if I want my children to be targeted and not have be targeted for being in the classes that are leveled, right, where they're the only ones. I just thought I didn't want that for my children. I don't want them to really have that be part of their experience. And Dorothea said, well, if you want to do something about it, then join the coalition, join the schools committee. I love a challenge, and so I joined, and and we worked on many issues. Deleveling, that was huge. I remember when we were working on it, and we thought, we're going to feel the ramifications of this. We may be defunded, and in fact that happened, right, with one of the towns, and we said it's important, it's worth doing, and I think we would do it again if we had to, because today those classes, those higher level classes, are integrated today, so that we saw the immediate work from that.
Okay, we're gonna talk about schools in a moment. I want to go back to that, but I want to get Abby Kotler with us because she's joining virtually from Puerto Rico. Abby, are you there?
I am.
I don't have you on my screen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Do we have?
Hello, can you hear me?
Abby, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Abigail Kotler. I moved to Maplewood in the 1980s with my family, my 2 sons, and my husband.
I think you're on mute.
I don't think I am, but can you get Ezzy down here, Don, on mute?
You're okay. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. My name is Abigail Kotler. I moved to Maplewood in the 1980s with my husband and my 2 children. My husband's family had moved here in 1969 and had been here for and we've been here since. I've been in Maplewood. I served as a Board of Ed member for 9 years, from 1991 to 2000. I was on the schools committee afterwards for a while before I was invited to be a trustee, and I became a trustee in 2009. I also serve on the executive committee as a vice chair.
Thank you.
My interest, of course, because I served on the Board of Ed, was always access and equity in the school system. And it was an issue that I had been involved with even before I was on the board. I served as a member on FAN, which I helped create, Friends and Neighbors, and USEEK, Urban Suburban Education Committee, which I think was one of the first committees that not only was a suburban committee, but we worked with cities, neighboring cities, East Orange and Newark. We dealt with financial issues and issues of access and equity in the community, educating the community on what to look for, how to help fight for access and equity economically with state and federal funding. And we educated ourselves, made brochures, and tried to work together. And then the Newark school system, I think, was taken over by the state in 1995. And that kind of put a nix on some of the stuff we were doing. But there are now a lot of organizations that are working on access and equity and financial issues about public funding and money for fair education. Most of what you've heard here tonight was about fair housing, but we also need to talk about fair education for all the children of New Jersey. and South Orange and Maplewood.
Thanks, Abby. I'm curious what your experience with the coalition has been like as a Latina. I think the perception often of both the coalition and of the two towns is that it's basically made up of white people and black people, and clearly, and I think there have been questions about, like, has the coalition served a broader group, a broader community of people of color? So I thought I would love to hear your perspective on that.
I'm glad you asked that question. We've always tried to reach out to the Latina community, the Haitian community, and other people of color, the Asian community. And my experience, for example, on the schools committee, a lot of the brochures that we put out, I have translated to make sure that the Latina community has access and is able to knows how to reach out to the district. I also did that during COVID. We put out a brochure, I think it was like a 38-page brochure, and it was translated, and I edited all the translating, and that went to not only our community, but other neighboring communities. So yes, we've reached out, we've done programs that I've also been a translator in person. Our brochures have also been translated into Creole. So it's not just a black and white organization. It's an organization that has always tried to reach out, though I think I would like to see more. And I would like to see more of the Latino community to come and actually try to be members and try to be a trustee. And it's been difficult getting members of the community actually to serve as trustees of the Latino community. So I'd like to see more of that.
Nice. Thank you, Abby. So let's talk about schools for a moment. And I was thinking, maybe Carol, how about if you start with, what was it like when you were raising your kids here? What were the access and equity issues that your children faced in the schools? And then we'll move to Patricia as sort of representing kind of the next generation and the next iteration of what needed to change.
Well, I've had 3 children that have gone through the school system, from Marshall Jefferson South Orange Middle School to Columbia High School. And at this point, they all have careers of their own and are off and about, quite successful. I will tell you that I learned early on that there were challenges, not so much with my 2 daughters, my youngest, with my son. Early on, I recognized that because he was relatively quiet and he was a little bit younger going into kindergarten, that there were perceived notions about him. And as he went through the school system, I recognized while he had some excellent teachers, he also had teachers that had less expectations for him. I understood early on, I have to say that I became involved with the PTAs early on at Marshall, and I had a tremendous role model because when I moved to the community, my next door neighbor and the first person I met was Mila J.C., who had also been involved with the schools. So we had this pact going through the school system that we would always try and leave a person of color on the PTA or the HSA because at that time, there just weren't that many. And I understood that I had to be involved and I had to advocate not only for my children, because my children left and I continued to advocate because I recognized that that was what was missing in the school system for many children, for whatever reason, children of color that didn't have a voice and their parents were not in a position for whatever reason to be advocates for them. So it sort of became my life's work and certainly my focus on the schools committee of the coalition where I worked for the last 25 years. So again, I have to reiterate that for for our children of color, particularly our black boys, there's work to be done. There continues to be work to be done. I have, in the last few years, because of the focus, quite frankly, not only of the coalition, but of other organizations that have pushed for these issues, we've raised issues, and I see them being addressed to a certain extent. So I remain hopeful.
So when we talk about leveling, that's the tracking system that groups kids by perceived ability. And I think it was documented by me and others that that system there were racial disparities in how kids were perceived. And I think the other real strain point was around suspensions and behavior issues and kids of color getting targeted or treated differently for the same kinds of infractions. So these are some of the issues that the schools committee was engaged with and working both with the school district and the community. Patricia, you came along, and what would you say was the state of the schools? Like what surprised you after moving to town and putting your kids in the schools here?
Right. I think the thing that surprised me, that made me get into action, was that the higher level classes did not necessarily represent the community, right? So many of us come here, we talk about diversity, and that means learning with each other in the same space, and that wasn't necessarily happening. And like I said, I didn't want that for my girls. So that to me marked the state of things, and I think that things are better. Not 100%. And just to be clear, I feel as though, my kids have had about 80 plus teachers in their career throughout, and they've maybe had one teacher that we thought wasn't doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. But by and large, this is a great school district. Every teacher is doing their best, but systemically is what we're looking at, right? We're looking at what do the numbers say in terms of suspension and things like that. So the thing that I focused on was on deleveling and giving, we know that representation matter, we know that access matters, right? And so making sure that students knew that now they have access to these high level classes, and that they're there, and that they're not the only ones. And that matters because they look around and they see themselves there.
And would you say you've seen tangible change in terms of not just access and that message going out, but in terms of the actual numbers and demographics of the high-level classes?
I think the numbers have improved, not significantly, but they have improved. We've seen some better numbers, right? I don't know if you're tracking those, Nancy, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, speeding right along, let's move on to Erin Scherzer. I know you were one of the people instrumental in creating the Community Board on Policing. Did I just call it the right thing?
You got the right Community Board on Police in Maplewood, yes.
So obviously policing, we've faced racial disparities in policing all across the country, and certainly here in Maplewood and South Orange. So tell me a little bit about what happened that gave rise to the idea and the need for a community board on policing, and what have you been able to do?
So residents of color, particularly black residents of Maplewood and South Orange, have been speaking out from moments of raising their own children here, moving into town, about some of the profiling and some of the harassment by the police department. In Maplewood, we had a moment where just change in policing technology, an incident was captured on video and also on audio, also using some of the surveillance cameras in the town, where it was July 4th. Everybody likes to have a good time on July 4th. There was an assumption that teenagers were being teenagers, walking home, just having a good time, and there was a directive from the police department to push these teens out of town, which wouldn't be okay even if they lived in a neighboring town. But it turns out the students actually lived right here in Maplewood and South Orange. And there was an incident of police brutality. A teenager was kicked in the head. A number of children were maced. There were very terrible words used by officers towards, I mean, they're teenagers, but they're somebody's child, right? And so once that information finally came to light, it took over a year of pressure from various organizations and the local press. Once that information came to light, a group of different organizations, including the coalition, got to work to say this can never happen here again. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about what that mobilization looked like if you want
please.
to know.
Yeah.
So 3 organizations in Maplewood and South Orange met with the police department and with the township, and Kelly was one of my, we spent many hours together advocating with township meeting after township meeting after township meeting, and we had a list of 10 objectives that we wanted to meet in terms of bringing greater transparency, more accountability within our police department. And what came from that was the birth of the first civilian police board, oversight board in the state of New Jersey. And so we look at it as it's very early on. We're like maybe 2.5 years in. And the focus of this board is we have no sticks, all we have is carrots. So is to work cooperatively with the community, with the elected officials, and the police department to build what should have been policing and what should have been community safety all along. So some things that we've worked on, we have just launched a crisis intervention social work program to be able to, our law enforcement officers, just given the state of the world, they were tasked with responding to mental health calls, and they're trying to do the best that they can. I'm not going to knock what they were trying to do, but they're not trained. And so we advocated, and we have a social worker that's starting in 2 weeks from now to launch a crisis intervention program. We are educating the community on when to call the police and when not to call the police. And I will be completely open with the community. That idea came from the police department. They were raising to us the number of calls that they were getting where people are actually using the police as a pawn, as a weapon for their racism. And so we are working on ways to be able to effectively use the police resources and training the community on basically not using 911 to harass your neighbors just for running and walking down the street or walking your dog. We're tracking traffic studies and patterns. We're monitoring use of force. So every quarter I go to the police department and review use of force videos and be able to work with the department in improving policies and training. We will be the first, very soon we're going through training now. We will have back-end internal affairs review. So once the decision has been made, we'll take a look, make recommendations for internal policies that may need to change, some training that may need to happen. And the whole goal of this is to create safer communities for every single person who lives here, walks here, shops here, wants to avoid Route 78, so they cut down Springfield Avenue, whatever that is, so people can feel safe and comfortable and hopefully be a model for other communities out there.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really impressive work. That was great to hear about. Okay, but we're going to keep moving. I'm almost out of time here. So Kelly Quirk, you are the chair of the coalition board. And I thought today Nancy and Audrey Rowe were on the radio, and Audrey said that one of the biggest challenges of the work over 20 years as the program director of the coalition was to put the aspirations of the community into practice, and that's like where the rubber meets the road, that there's a lot of good intention, but it's very hard to actually move the needle and get people to maybe even make sacrifices or, put their kid on a bus and send them across town or whatever it is, like whatever the stress point is. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about sort of the institutions in our community and how you've tried to work with them, whether it's the realtors or the banks or the school district, the school board, the town elected officials, what's that been like?
Sure. So I think in the video you guys saw earlier, Carol referenced relationships and relationships building. And I think that that's a multi-level process, right? So for the coalition, that's building relationships with the town governing bodies so that we can come to them, hey, we're hearing this concern. Building relationships with the community board on police so that when things are bubbling up for the coalition, we're making sure the folks in power and the folks who have the authority to do things understand that. I think sometimes in our history and sometimes currently it's speaking truth to power when things are not going right. And you know, Patricia very rightly brought up that sometimes that's at a consequence, and a consequence to us, and to still do the right thing despite that. I think there's also sort of what the coalition, you know, would strive for in this community is for people to also take that message to heart personally. So I think there are times when, and I'll speak for members of like the white community, where we can be very, yes, we want to get behind this policy, but if you look at people's social spheres, is the social sphere also integrated? Are they having real, actual relationships with their neighbors, or is it, is that not happening? And so I think that that relationship building as a community is a responsibility of all of us who move here. And I think the coalition has always marketed our town is for all people. And part of that is, if you're moving here, is also your obligation to furthering that mission, right? That if that's a value of our towns, then everybody has a part to play in that. And so I think the other thing, you know, we try and build the relationships with institutions of power, and I think, you know, we've been successful, and we're currently very successful at maintaining those relationships. And part of having that is being able to say candidly, this isn't working. Part of that is being able to say, there's something going on with policing, or there's something happening in this neighborhood, or there's tension here, and we need to address it. And I'm proud of the work of building those relationships, and I'm hopeful for our community that, you know, people hearing this will also take, like, what is my responsibility as an individual person in furthering those relationships in my own sphere of influence.
Thank you. I have questions, and you can send more by sending them to communitycoalitiononrace@gmail.com. Before I get to these questions, Nancy Gagne, as executive director, how engaged are other suburban communities around us on issues of race? And like, how much contact do you have, and what would you say are the lessons learned here that would be helpful to communities around us in Essex County and elsewhere?
Yeah, we so strive to model our program, our effort over 25 years and ongoing with other communities. We do get lots of phone calls, lots of outreach from people in the region. We've heard from people in New York and Connecticut and Florida, Ohio, California. Often people want to start with something simple like a Conversations on Race. And we generally, this is a great program, and we have lots of community engagement programs that bring people into the conversation. So many of the things that you heard about tonight grew out of those conversations. So we raised some issues about policing. We've raised lots of issues about schools. Until you get people at the table, you're not going to build some of these other structures that help deal with the issues. But to your question about working with other communities, they often think that the one program is going to be the thing that solves the problem. But we like to tell them, you need to ask, what is the issue that you're trying to address? What are your racial demographics? Is this just a feel-good effort, or is there something really serious that you're working on? How much commitment do you have from institutions and elected leaders? Can you engage the faith community? Can you engage your school directors? You need to bring everybody to the table.
Right. Okay, I'm going to read the question and see which one of you wants to jump on it, because I'm not quite sure how to direct this one. The question is, how have strategies and programming evolved? How is collaborating and making way for other racial and social justice groups formed more recently? How is working with other groups going, I guess, is the question. Kelly?
So I'll take the latter part of the question. And just say that I don't think there's this, if we're all working towards the same mission, it's okay for different groups to have different strategies to achieving that. And I think that part of the partnerships we've seen with different groups in the community allows different space for different people to find their voice, and it allows for different strategies to all move sort of the mission towards justice. And so there are certainly times where we may disagree on strategy and we may disagree on a specific issue, but I think that overall, if the goal is moving towards social justice, then we're all sort of like on the same team moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And does anyone want to take a stab at how strategy and programming has evolved over the 25 years?
Well, when I, part of my work on the coalition board and a number of people here, it's one of the challenges of a small nonprofit is everyone has a great idea, and at some point we only have but so many hours to get that done. So under the leadership of Kelly, and I know Fred was involved with this process as well, we developed metrics and a strategic plan so that we could streamline our efforts and ensure that all the programming we do and the outcoming we do meet our objectives of equity and inclusion. And we're setting just kind of more of that strategic planning, and that only comes with an organization growing over time and learning from, hey, maybe we took too much on, or and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the coalition is that we're adaptable and we want to be responsive to the needs of our community without losing the core aspect of our mission.
Mm-hmm. Nancy.
I would just add that, yeah, to pick up on what Erin is saying, that we would love to do everything, but we really did try to focus maybe 5 or 8 years ago in some strategic planning. And when we talk about working in all areas of community life, that includes the schools, residential, affirmative marketing, and community engagement. So we have our hand in all of those areas, but it helps us to ask the question, does this serve the mission every time we're doing something that is connected to neighborhoods or to realtors or to the schools? Does this serve our mission?
Okay. Next question is, and this is an interesting one because I don't have any actual facts about this, but it seems as a resident of this community that we are going through a wave of gentrification, and that prices have spiked up, and it seems like the young families coming in seem whiter to me, if I can say that. I don't have any actual demographics, but that's what this question is. How have the demographics of SOMA, otherwise known as MAPSO, changed over 25 years? You have built new housing recently, large apartments. What is the demographic impact? Fred?
Well, we started out at a certain level between whites and black, persons of color, and that stayed. The white population increased slightly over the period of time, but then in the last 5 to 10 years, we have been losing more of our black population than we would like, and more, and as you pointed out, there are more white residents moving in. Now, at first we thought about this and said, well, let's see, what are we doing wrong? What's going on here? But the fact of the matter is, as I'm sure you know, the entire Northeast is losing a black population to various other areas of the country. And I think a lot of that is due to the economic forces that have been in play over the last decade or so. And it's people without a great deal of wealth have to move where it's more affordable. We have, there's an explosion of market values now in South Orange and Maplewood. We're sitting on homes that we bought for $100,000, and I can't, it's gone up quite a lot since then. So we're working on it, and we have programs, and I think you've heard us talk about the wealth equalizing programs, where we can get assets into the hands of people who can't afford that extra amount in order to get in. We're working on this, but I don't think it's Maplewood and South Orange's problem. I think it's larger than that, But we want to be the ones out in front of this problem.
Erin, you wanted to add something?
I think as we look at the next 15, 20 years of our community, we need to look at race, of course. We also need to look at economics. I know there's always this great pride in home values, and home values are rising, but there's a downside to that. It makes it very difficult to have an economically diverse community. As someone who grew up blue collar, I am disappointed that my child will not have many classmates that are blue collar as well, because it is just too expensive to live here. I also think we need to recognize, and just to dispel the myth, that having lower homes that are more affordable on the lower financial value necessarily translates into more diverse homeowners coming in. The reality is there are plenty of Black bankers and top lawyers and top executives, and the question is, what are we doing in our community and our schools and our neighborhoods and the way we interact with policing and businesses, so that every buyer of color, regardless of what they make, are able to see themselves and be comfortable within this community. And I think for the coalition going forward, that is going to be our biggest challenge.
Nancy?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that. It's a really important distinction that we look at socioeconomic diversity and racial diversity. Over the course of the coalition's history, for the first 10 years, there was stable racial integration, which was one of the goals. Then we started looking very seriously at demographics and saw an increase in white in-movers and a lower lower number of Black in-movers. We worried between 2016 and 2019, before the 2020 census came out, that would be more dramatic than it ended up being. So we're pleased about that, but we are taking action with a targeted marketing website to make sure that we can appeal to people, to in-movers of color. That's one point. The other point about the socioeconomic diversity, one of the first things I remember doing as executive director, that was like back in 2009, was to challenge, and not with the support of the Board of Trustees, of course, to challenge the town's approach to affordable housing, to meeting their fair share of affordable housing units. It was very controversial. The laws in New Jersey did change, and our towns are much more amenable and focused on making sure that we do meet those fair share affordable housing requirements.
Kelly wants to jump in.
I just want to put a plug. One of the things that made me appreciate how hard the coalition works is the demographics report, and we will be issuing our updated demographics report. People should look for it. With the rich census data that we got out of the 2020 census, that our Secretary of State referenced, the complete count, and why that was important, why the coalition, helped sort of spread the word the census is coming. And one of the things that people will be able to see when that report gets issued is by neighborhood block, by census block, what has that change looked like since the last census in the last 10 years? And I think as people work within their neighborhoods, that's a big question about how do we make this neighborhood welcoming? And I think in some neighborhoods that may dispel the assumption that you have of, oh, I see mostly white and young families. And in some neighborhoods that might be like, oh, what I'm seeing is reflected in this data. And so I think that gives us important launching ground for what does the work look like next? How do we do this on the block by block level? How do we support that as a coalition?
And even with the reduced number of people of color moving in, we're one of maybe 4 suburbs in the state with the percentages of Black and white residents. And I don't want to, I know our video listed Asian and Hispanic percentage population. We do not lump those two groups together when we look at the demographics. So we have a growing and wonderful Asian and Hispanic population in both towns.
Okay, let's try to squeeze in a couple more questions. With so many financial needs Is this really a good investment of money at this time?
What does that mean?
I'm sure you're all just dying to answer that one.
Well, if we're going to go to take the premise of everyone wants great property values, which again, as you know, we want to make sure that we're creating the best possible community, the best possible schools, the safest place to live, and for people not to be harassed on the street. And so this is an incredible place to, the bang for buck that you get out of your money, out of the Coalition on Race, other organizations should follow the lead of this group.
And that leads to the next question, which is, do other communities have coalitions on race? And if so, where? Nancy?
Other communities have, they have like community relations committees. They have interfaith groups that work on racial equity and diversity issues. They will have, like I said before, conversations on race, and that may happen multiple times throughout the year. But we are not aware of really any that work with the breadth that we work here in South Orange and Maplewood.
Okay. Carol?
You know, and I would also like to say, in terms of other communities, because we have certainly been approached, you have a lot of coalitions, but when you talk about a coalition on race, automatically that sends up signals. And residents become concerned. Is there a problem? What is the problem? How do you address the problem? So it's a challenge in terms of what you're addressing, as Nancy said, and how you go about it. And again, when you talk about race, you have different constituents, different feelings about the Black community, Hispanic community, the AAPI community, and of course the white community. So you really have to define what it is that the coalition wants to do. And you really have to, if it's about race, then you need to say it's about race.
Fred?
May I just circle back to that question about is it worth it?
Uh-huh.
I think today can't think of anything that's more worth it. Because to the extent that this community, this coalition, serves as a model for other communities, there's nothing more important in today's political landscape than demonstrating that we can have harmonious relations and not the fractured relations that those relationships are being perpetuated around the country for political profit. To show that this can be done without that goal, and for the good of integration and for the good of people who live in these communities, is worth every penny.
Well, let's stay with you, Fred, because here's a good question, I think, for you. Was it difficult to get local politicians on board? This person says they don't usually address race. I don't know if that's true, but was it, how did it go in the early days?
Well, I think you saw an example of that with the former mayor of South Orange, Bill Calabrese, who was advised by the town lawyer, don't get involved in this is racial, you're going to have trouble. Yeah, it was difficult at first, although I will say that the initial instigation for a group that would look into these issues back in the 90s did come from the governing bodies. I was asked by former Mayor Ellen Davenport to sit on a committee to think about what should we do about this. So it was on the one hand encouraging, but on the other hand, well, don't go too far. don't be social engineers here. And by the way, we, the township committee, the governing bodies, we decide what to do. So don't get out ahead of your skis. So it was difficult, and we had trouble getting funding sometimes from different municipal officials based upon what policies we were espousing. Were they good? Were they in favor of them or not? Yeah, it's been a back and forth, but as of late, nothing but great relationships with the governing bodies, and we're very happy about that.
Wait, we're almost out of time, so I think this is a good last question. What has been the biggest impact of the coalition's work? Patricia.
From my perspective, I just want to continue saying what Fred was saying. This work of building community, building an integrated community is hard work. I mean, anyone can show up and say, I want diversity. I want to live next to you. Let's just make this happen. But to really have people at the dinner table and and really have these meaningful conversations, providing the safe space to have these meaningful conversations, that's hard work. That requires trust, that requires a whole bunch of things. So it doesn't just happen overnight, it's built, right, over 25 years. So I think that to me has been the impact. People know that when the Community Coalition on Race has an event, it's something that you can go to, you can safely voice what your thoughts are, what your feelings are, and have that conversation. So I think that's one of the major impacts for me.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Oh. And we have more music coming. Don't go away. And Nancy, I think you're coming up. And Kelly?
Thank you. Hi. So I wanted to thank everyone who's attended and learned about our 25-year history. And I look forward, and I think we all look forward to the continued evolution of this organization. And as we launch the Wealth Gap Equalizer Loan, as we relaunch our new demographics report, and I think a lot about the benefit of having a 25-year history, that it gives you patience, it gives you perspective. The intergenerational work of this organization is incredibly important, and it gives us that patience and perspective to learn and to adapt as challenges arise, as we take on these deep equity issues that still exist. So our work is not over, and we encourage you to join us in our work, to join us in your own communities as we work on breaking down racial injustice. I want to give many thanks, and they're not on the screen, so I'm going to read from my handwritten notes, to the Honorable Tahisha Way, to Nancy Solomon, to Audrey Rowe and Solana, to the 25th Anniversary History Committee, Carol Berry Austin, Fred Profeta, Abby Kotler, Nancy Gagne, Barbara Heisler, Robert Marchman, Mickey Murphy, Liz Testa, Meredith Sue Willis, and Renee Willis. We had a number of community partners who worked with us. SOPAC, the South Orange Public Library, Bergen Audiovisual, Rosecom, the Ethical Culture Society of Essex. We had a wonderful videographer, Brick City Greenhouse, and I probably missed one. And then also I just want to honor that over the last 25 years, we've had 125 trustees and thousands of volunteers who've given their time, talent to this organization, and most importantly to the mission, and the mission of racial integration and true inclusion in our communities. And with that, you want to learn more about us and our 501c3, you can go to communitycoalitiononrace.org and volunteer. You can give, and you can learn more about what's upcoming for us. And with that, I'll turn this to Nancy.
Thanks, Kelly. I just want to add that I am grateful every day for the work that I get to do and all the people I get to work with. We will continue to tell the history of our work beyond tonight's presentation with an upcoming podcast series called Light the Way, Stories of One Community's Commitment to Racial Equity and Integration. Each interview is a candid conversation that dives deep into personal experiences and shines a light on the relentless work of the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race over the last quarter century. The podcast series begins with a 45-minute episode featuring SZA and Audrey Rowe. Look for a link to the podcast on our website. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Please reach out to us if you would like to know more about our mission and our work, or want to talk about bringing this work to your community. We conclude tonight with a music video chosen by SZA, an acoustic version of Good Days.